yra beveik 700.
Right.
Ir jie yra labai labai žemus, 40.
So welcome, everyone. My name is Bradley Woodworth, and I'm the program manager of Yale's Baltic Studies program. We're so glad you here physically in the room and those of you via Zoom can join us today at the symposium, Escaping with Čiurlionis. Sponsors of the symposium include the Yale Baltic Studies program, the Kazickas Family Foundation, the Ministry of Culture of the Republic of Lithuania, and the Lithuanian Culture Institute. And we're so grateful to all of these institutions that have made this event today possible. This year marks the 150th anniversary of the birth of the great Lithuanian painter and composer Mikalojus Konstantinas Čiurlionis. A figure of national reverence in Lithuania, Čiurlionis is commemorated in the name of Lithuania's leading children's music school, an art and dance school, the National Art Museum in Kaunas, Lithuania, and beginning this year, the 150th anniversary of his birth, the Vilnius International Airport. This symposium and the concert this evening are just some of the many similar commemorative events being held throughout the world this year, focused on the work of Čiurlionis in Japan, Germany, Poland, several in the United States, in addition to this symposium today, and many in Lithuania. At the end of the symposium later today, we will hold in Sudler Hall, it's just less than a 5-minute walk from where we're sitting here, at 6 p.m. a concert of Čiurlionis' music and music inspired by him, featuring the very well-known and great Lithuanian pianist Sandra and the Haven Quartet. Likewise, concerts featuring Čiurlionis' music are being held this year in concert halls all over the world. I was just in Brno, Czech Republic 2 weeks ago and opened up the local arts paper, and there 2 weeks later, just a little bit earlier this month, was an entire concert dedicated to Čiurlionis' music. I have a few more words to add, including people to thank, but first I would like to ask the Consul General of Lithuania, Dovydas Špokauskas, who has come here from New York today for this event, to add a few words of welcome.
Thank you so much. Sveiki, labas rytas. Sveikas, Bradley. It's always good to know that every time I meet you, your Lithuanian is getting better and better each time. I'm so envious to how you can preserve this, the quality that all the kids have to manage to learn a new language so quickly. So tell me, what's your secret? It's a real pleasure to see you all at the Yale University Baltic Studies program. And the Consulate General of Lithuania is so happy and so proud to be part of this symposium. And of course, thank you so much, the whole team of the Baltic Studies program for making this happen. Thank you very much for Kazickas Family Foundation, which is, of course, instrumental when it comes to the Baltic Studies program itself, but also that contributed to this particular event. And our Ministry of Culture, our Cultural Institute, is also sponsoring this event, and I would like to take this opportunity to introduce you to Akvilė Kavaliauskaitė, who's our new cultural attaché in the United States. She has just replaced Gražina Michnevičiūtė, who many of you know so well, and who was, of course, instrumental in making this event a reality. And as Brad has already mentioned, there has been an impressive number of events dedicated to Čiurlionis this year, both throughout the world, but also in the United States. I'm so happy that this symposium is probably the pinnacle of it in terms of how we think, how we see Čiurlionis in the context of both Lithuania, but in a wider sense as well. And I'm so happy that so many prominent experts from Lithuania, but from all over as well, are here to think, talk, and discuss Čiurlionis. So I'm not here to offer any deep thoughts, because there's just so many experts there who are a lot more qualified to do that. So as the year of Čiurlionis is slowly going to a close, The one thing I would like to pitch is what Brad has mentioned. There are still some events in the United States that will offer you an opportunity to get to know Čiurlionis better. And there will be a tour in just a couple of weeks from two acclaimed Lithuanian artists, pianist Rokas Zubovas and cellist Gleb Pishnak. And they would perform both Čiurlionis and other composers, such as Anatolija Šenderovas and Žibuoklė Martinaitytė, together with American musical icons such as Philip Glass or George Gershwin, who both actually have ancestral ties to Lithuania as well. The concerts will take place in San Francisco on November 14, in Los Angeles, November 16, Washington, D.C., November 19, Chicago, 21st and 22nd of November, and finally, of course, in New York at Scandinavia House on November 25th. So I'm really hoping that on top of today's events, we will see each other soon and at some of the more of Čiurlionis performances. Thank you very much for making it here today. Thank you for all who did this and made this a reality. Have a really great day today. Thank you.
Labai ačiū Jums, pone generalai Skonsai, už Jūsų šiltus žodžius. This event has been in the works for nearly an entire year. The former cultural attaché, as the Consul General just mentioned, former cultural attaché of Lithuania in New York, Gražina Michnevičiūtė, reached out to us here at Yale early last November, so a year ago, with the suggestion for this event. Unfortunately, Gražina can't be here with us in person. I think she's here on Zoom. And Gražina, labai ačiū už visą Jūsų sunkų darbą ir atsidavimą, kurie leido šią dieną išgyventi. Labai ačiū. So I just thanked her very, very warmly, as best I could. In addition to the sponsors of this event, whom I mentioned right at the top, and whom are also listed in the program, I especially want to thank those who have been partnering with us now for a year in organizing this symposium. I especially want to thank Ruth. She is Ruta Stanavičiūtė, professor of musicology at the Lithuanian Academy of Music and Art and Theater. We met a year ago in January to talk one night over coffee about this event, and now here it actually is. So Ruta, labai ačiū Jums už viską Jūsų darbą su mumis. I also want to thank the new cultural attaché, Akvilė Kavaliauskaitė, who beginning this fall we met and has been helping us get this event, so to speak, across the finish line. And thank you as well, Consul General Šakauskas, for your constant support of this event. And also I want to thank Vytautas Oškinis. I'm not sure if Vytautas is here. This is the grandson of Vytautas Landsbergis, who is our opening speaker. The three of us met in Vilnius in July, and he did produce the video of his grandfather, which you will see in just a few minutes. In addition, I give a huge thank you to the staff at the European Studies Council within the Macmillan Center for International and Area Studies. This is the home of the Yale Baltic Studies program, especially Senior Program Manager Carly Coble, who's the one that really makes these programs run. Carly, your work, patience and perseverance is required. makes events like this not just a Yale event, but an international event possible. So thank you, Carly. Thank you so much. To begin things off, we will hear some remarks from Vytautas Landsbergis, writer, musician, former head of state of Lithuania. Vytautas Landsbergis likely needs no introduction to most of you here. He's the founding leader of Sąjūdis, the group that led the struggle for Lithuania to become independent again in 1990. He was the chairman of the Supreme Council, the Seimas, or essentially head of state from the Declaration of Independence in March 1990 through the end of 1992. And Vytautas Landsbergis has also likely published more work on Čiurlionis than anyone else in the world. Čiurlionis' Art, 1976, And so, Sandra, there's the book that we talked about last night. Yale's copy. Čiurlionis, so these books were published in Lithuania. Čiurlionis' Music, 1996. The whole of Čiurlionis, 2008. Mažoji Čiurlioniana, a little Čiurlionis in 2011. Editors of letters between Čiurlionis and his wife Sophie, in addition to editing some of his music. So let's go ahead.
We've had some slight tech issues, so just bear with us, but we should.
Escaping is the fruitless choice. You will never succeed, folks. To escape approaching tide of senselessness. The only way to do it is the refusal of humanity. Embrace and enjoy the world of brothers. That is the lesson.
We'll try it one more time.
To escape approaching tide of senselessness. The only way to do it is the refusal of inhumanity. Embrace and enjoy the world of brothers. That is the lesson of Čiurlionis.
There is an option to switch off
Escaping is the fruitless choice. You will never succeed, folks. To escape approaching tide of senselessness. The only way to do it is the refusal of inhumanity. Embrace and enjoy the world of brothers. That is the lesson of Čiurlionis.
So welcome to this. Now we'll we'll begin now our first panel. Approaches to Čiurlionis. We have three speakers. Philip Bullock, Virginija, Vitkienė, and Sandra Skurvida. Thank you all for being here. So I'll introduce each of you separately before the beginning of your remarks, and as I said, we'll have about 20 minutes for each of you to speak. Philip Bullock is professor of Russian literature and music at the University of Oxford. He's published widely on aspects of Russophone literature and culture from the late 18th century onwards, with a particular interest in word-music relations in both opera and song. He has a strong interest in West European reception of Russian culture around the turn of the 20th century, as well in questions of translation, transnationalism, cultural exchange more generally. His most recent publications include Pyotr Tchaikovsky, published in 2016, editor of Rachmaninoff in His World, 2022, His research and speaking and writing extends not only to Lithuanian subjects, but also to other areas throughout the Baltic and including Finland. His research has been supported by the British Academy, the Leverhulme Trust and UK Arts and Humanities Research Council, and has held visiting fellowships at Grenoble, Paris, and Princeton. So, Professor Bullock, please.
We made it. Thank you. Thank you so much to everybody who made possible my visit here as part of these events marking the anniversary celebrations of Čiurlionis' birth. I'm entirely aware, as you can tell from that little introduction, that I am no expert when it comes to the lives and works of the great Lithuanian composer and painter. I learned a vast deal 2 weeks ago at the conference held at Lithuanian Academy of Music and Drama in Vilnius. But here I'm going to be reflecting on some rather more distant questions inspired by Čiurlionis' mastery of both painting and music, very much approaching from a conceptual and physical distance. But before I do that, I wanted to take a moment to register my own positionality, because as an undergraduate student who began the study of Russian in 1991, I was inspired by my interest in the Russian Silver Age. And as an 18-year-old, I came across the essays of Vyacheslav Ivanov and others, which were so central to shaping the early European reception of Čiurlionis' works. The exhibitions of paintings in Petersburg and Moscow, the performances of compositions in those imperial capitals, and his reception by a generation of Russian modernists remain important documents in our understanding of the matter. However, I can't but acknowledge Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine and the impact that it has had on many in the region, and the way it has caused many of us to reflect on the place of Russian culture around the globe, and to reflect on the biases that shape and distort my field. That said, I still feel as if I need to begin with Vyacheslav Ivanov and his 1914 essay on Čiurlionis. Here, Ivanov argues that his paintings take us from the realm of ordinary reality to a higher reality, ad realibus ad realiora, as the phrase goes. Rooted in seemingly familiar objects, Čiurlionis' artistic practice invests them with metaphysical significance. How then is this transformation achieved? According to Ivanov, it is Čiurlionis' dual vocation as both painter and musician. In my opinion, his method is the artistic treatment of the elements of visual perception according to a principle derived from music. Ivanov references a number of Čiurlionis' paintings, but he seems to have known almost nothing of his music. Indeed, he claims he, Čiurlionis, was a musician not because of his special musical training, since he did not produce anything particularly new or important in music. Discuss. But the musical element seems to fill his inner self and concentrate mainly, strange as it may seem, on the centers of his visual perception. Such ignorance is not surprising. Around this time, performances of Čiurlionis' music were rare in Russian modernist circles, so his reputation as an artist working equally across two media was more a question of belief than of first-hand experience. An interest in the synthesis of the arts was widespread at the time. And unsurprisingly, Ivanov alludes to Wagner's theory of the Gesamtkunstwerk, as well as Scriabin's synesthesia. But what interests me is his seeming skepticism about the possibility of ever achieving such a synthesis. Ivanov claims, for instance, that no form of art should try to abandon its natural limits. No artist should consciously wish to allow his art to undergo so radical change. And he goes on to distinguish between music and painting as follows. Divorcing itself from the fourth dimension, which we usually call time, painting assumes all objects are static and incapable of movement. Motion itself, under the gaze of Gorgons, becomes petrified into a moment that will last all eternity. The kinetic nature of music unfolds over a period of elapsed time, and therefore makes us forget space. In this manner, the two sisters, painting, which knows only space, and music, which knows only time, oppose each other. Now, this distinction between the temporal essence of music and the spatial nature of painting is rooted, of course, in the work of the 18th century philosopher Gotthold Friedrich Lessing and his 1766 essay on the Laocoon. So with Lessing in mind, I wish to examine not so much the synthesis of the arts as the limitations placed on that synthesis, in order then to work out why the search for that synthesis between music and painting became such a priority around the turn of the century, and what this might tell us about the case of Čiurlionis. Lessing's argument rests on a statue in the collection of the Vatican Museum in Rome, and Lessing certainly knew accounts of the sculpture by Pliny and by Winckelmann, as well as the poetic description by Virgil. The most famous aspect of his argument is the discussion of whether artistic media inhabit time or space, a distinction underpinning the commensurability or the incommensurability of the arts. Nothing obliges the poet, he says, to concentrate his picture into a single moment. He can take up every action, if he will, from its origin and carry it through all possible changes to its issue. Every change which would require from the painter a separate picture costs him but a single touch. Now, over the course of the 19th century, the generic distinctions that were so central to Lessing's paradigm were increasingly effaced. And this is a familiar story, tracing the move away from representation as the primary function of art. In its place came an emphasis on self-sufficiency, with music coming to occupy the highest place in the hierarchy of arts, precisely because of its association with abstraction rather than representation. Now, that impulse is best summarized in Walter Pater's famous essay, The School of Giorgione, included in his Renaissance, which contains the very frequently cited claim that all art constantly aspires towards the condition of music, as well as a discussion of inter-art analogy in general. Pater argues, each art may be observed to pass into the condition of some other art, by what German critics term an Anderstreben, a partial alienation from its own limitations, through which the arts are able not indeed to supply the place of each other, but reciprocally to lend each other new forces. But I would argue that Pater's argument is more subtle, harboring a skepticism towards the very possibility of such an interpenetration. He refers explicitly back to Lessing, and his essay, Pater's, begins with the following warning against any attempt to efface the formal distinctions between artistic media. It is the mistake of popular criticism to regard poetry, music, and painting, all the various products of art, as but translations into different languages of one and the same fixed quantity of imaginative thought, supplemented by certain technical qualities of color, in painting of sound, in music of rhythmical word, in sound, in music of rhythmical words in poetry. Arguing that the arts are defined by their limitations rather than their similarities, Pater argues that the critic is required to define these limitations, to estimate the degree in which a given work of art fulfills its responsibilities to its special tune. In the thought of my next two examples, we observe a similar tension between, on the one hand, a will to synthesis, and on the other, a realization of the limitations placed upon such an aspiration. In his programmatic sonnet, Correspondance, Baudelaire sets out a primer in the theory of the poetic symbol, as well as a justification of inter-art analogy. But like Pater's claim that all art aspires constantly towards the condition of music, Baudelaire's argument is more ambiguous. On the one hand, it contains a series of statements based on commensurability. And so in the first hand, we see a series of statements such as nature is a temple in which living pillars give voice to confused words. There, man passes through forests of symbols, which look on him with understanding eyes. But that correspondence, that commensurability, is far less precise than we might begin to think in the first stanza. In the rest of the poem, I've marked them here, Baudelaire makes use of the word comme 7 times, as or like. Now, repetition is a key symbolist practice, investing a form of musicality in poetry that dislocates language from referential meaning. But I would also suggest that comme is doing too much work here. To use the language of literary criticism, Baudelaire's Correspondance opens with a metaphor, one thing is another, but in the second stanza onwards, it dissolves into the less precise comparison implied by simile. Something is like something. To suggest that one thing is something else is to posit exact correspondence. To suggest that one thing is like another is to suggest analogy, but not yet identification. I even wonder whether it suggests that one thing is, in essence, not akin to something else. So having gone through Pater and Baudelaire, I now wish to turn to Kandinsky. And I'm aware of the debate as to whether Čiurlionis had any impact on Kandinsky's turn towards abstraction, but that is not my topic. My interest here is instead in Kandinsky's discussion of the relationship between painting and music in Über das Geistliche in der Kunst. Here, Kandinsky draws on the language of music to talk about painting. His vocabulary refers to resonance, echo, reverberation, key, and harmony. The emotional states evoked by artworks are achieved through mood. And that word in German, Stimmung, is much more musical than in English, suggesting the tuning of an instrument or the production of voice, Stimme. He talks about composers, Beethoven, Schumann, Weber, Wagner, Debussy, Mussorgsky, Scriabin, and above all, Schoenberg. Rather more frequently than he talks about painters, Rossetti, Burne-Jones, Böcklin, von Stuck, Segantini, and Cézanne. And in literature, he cites Metternich, because in his plays, the word is an inner sound whose repetition creates a musicality that is as powerful as a bell tolling, a plucked string, the clatter of wood falling on wood. So Kandinsky seems to be proposing an aesthetic in which the various arts and disciplines learn from one another and share common aspirations. He notes too that the arts have, in recent times, never come together more closely than now in this final hour of the spiritual revolution. He argues too that painting's turn to abstraction is inspired directly by music's lack of referential content. This is why in painting we find this ongoing search for rhythm and abstract mathematical construction. This explains the contemporary appreciation for repeated tones of color, for dynamism and motion within color, and so forth. As you might guess, I think Kandinsky is more skeptical than that. And we see that in his debt to Lessing. He argues that one form must first learn from another how to exploit its resources and then learn how to apply its own media in a way that is essentially the same, but guided by the principle that is unique to each discipline alone. In learning this, the artist must not forget that every medium has its own medium appropriate mode of application, which awaits discovery. And here, quoting indirectly Lessing, he observes, music has the asset of time, for example, of extended duration. While painting lacks this advantage, an artist can, however, present his audience with the entirety of work in one moment, one glance, a luxury that music does not have. What is still more significant about Kandinsky's theory is its awareness of the role of the viewer and of the listener. Much discussion of inter-art analogy focuses on the question of intentionality, of how writers, composers, and artists themselves seek to efface the distinction between the various media in the search for a synthesis of the arts and the production of a total work of art at the moment of creative inception. Yet what links Kandinsky, Pater, and indeed Lessing is the fact that their ideas focus the attention back towards the act of perception rather than creation. Kandinsky says, for instance, it is only when a person's sensitivities are more highly developed that the range of properties or capacities of objects and entities acquire inner value and eventually an inner sound, which can be heard by the viewer. In the Renaissance, Pater said, what is this song or picture, this engaging personality presented in life or in a book to me? What effect does it produce on me? Does it give me pleasure? And if so, what sort or degree of pleasure? That impulse was there in Lessing, where the distinction between painting and poetry rests primarily on how artworks across different media are perceived by their respective audiences. It is this sense of how individual readers and viewers receive and process artworks that is, I would contend, the most significant legacy of Lessing's thought when it comes to a discussion of artistic synthesis and inter-art analogy. It is a legacy that shaped Pater and Kandinsky, and which briefly I want to apply to the work of Čiurlionis. Unlike Kandinsky, Scriabin, Schoenberg, Stravinsky, Klee, or any of the other figures routinely mentioned in discussion of turn of the century into art synthesis, Čiurlionis was an artist who worked equally across both music and painting, although at rather different phases in his too brief life. What I want to do is to speculate not so much about that creative relationship between painting and music in Čiurlionis' own life, as about the impact of that relationship on the processes that determine how we as audiences engage with his works. To ask how we might hear his paintings, how we might see his musical compositions. To begin with, there is the use of musical titles to describe paintings, most notably sonata, but other musical genres such as the prelude and fugue. This was widespread at the time, and one thinks immediately of Whistler and his appeal to the idea of the symphony. But when it comes to the case of Čiurlionis, this becomes more than a general abstract metaphor. His practice of linking 3 or 4 individual pictures, and I think I may have transposed 2 of the images here, for working on different sources, apologies. But this juxtaposition creates a kind of narrativity across the sequence of works, requiring the viewer to take them in, not at a single moment, as Lessing argued, but in a sequence that acquires a temporal aspect. Within works, we see a combination of different pictorial layers that forces the viewer to move between them, producing a kind of silent visual counterpoint. In both cases, a sense of sequential narrativity and internal counterpart are the product partly of Čiurlionis' artistic attention, but more significantly, the product of the viewer's active engagement with what they are watching or what they are hearing. Moreover, as a trained musician, Čiurlionis was sensitive to the question of what, in fact, music is. Much discussion has tended to focus on the question of music as a form of performance, or as an instance of organized temporal sound. But music is also a script, akin to words on a page or strokes on a canvas. The representation of the material means of musical reproduction has a long history in art, just as it became an object of interest to modernists. In Čiurlionis, this is not just a question of a visual language that resembles, in the way that some of Klee's paintings do, the staves of a score. It relates even to the inclusion of notation itself in visual form, as in the sequence of Lithuanian folk songs from 1909. Here we see the scores of the songs surrounded by an elaborate decorative framework that recalls explicitly the work of Aubrey Beardsley. The repetitive recursive circles and arabesques presuppose a mode of cognition that is not linear, that is not instantaneous, but is expansive, cyclical, and as rhythmically inflected as music itself. Can we perform a reverse process when it comes to Čiurlionis' scores to identify a means of understanding them that draws on visuality and visual perception? Here, I want to set aside the larger orchestral canvases that have usually been discussed in this context, Miške and Jura, in the forest and the sea. Now, for obvious reasons, parallels with Debussy have been adduced here, as well as with the programmatic symphonic scores that was such a feature of the Russian National School and the New German School in the mid-19th century. But I think we should look instead at the sequence of late preludes, including the preludes with the title Marios, the Sea, that Čiurlionis composed in the final years of his life. Scholars have pointed to the harmonic inventiveness of these late works, with their move to a musical language bordering on the atonal. They have also singled out a propensity to linearity and quasi-polyphonic musical structuring. But what has interested me in listening to them obsessively for the last few months is their sense of compression and concision, as if Čiurlionis is seeking to challenge the very durational notion of music or listening to create instead an impression of instantaneity that has long been held to be the principal characteristic of the visual arts. These are just extremely distant, ignorant, uninformed speculations about how we might reconsider the question of the visual, and the musical in Čiurlionis' work, and more generally in figures around the turn of the 20th century. I'm looking forward to the other papers, to our discussions, and once again, I'd like very sincerely to thank the organizers of this conference and you, the audience, for your attention today.
Thank you. Well, I need to apologize to President. Thank you very much. I need to apologize to you and to the audience. I neglected to read the title of your, and you could have nudged me, but you heard through the content, obviously, what the title of this talk was, Seen with the Inner Ear, Music and Image Around the Fin de Siècle. I have lots of questions, but what we're going to do is hear each speaker consecutively, and then we will leave a half an hour for questions and answers. So next, we have Dr. Virginija Vitkienė, head of the director of the Čiurlionis National Museum. I have much more, of course, to say. She has developed a multifaceted career as a lecturer, art critic, curator, writer, and chief manager of international projects. In 2025, she was appointed, as I just mentioned, general director of the MK Čiurlionis National Museum of Art, which I strongly encourage those of you that have been there understand the riches, incredible riches of this museum. And those of you who haven't been, I strongly encourage you to go. Dr. Vitkienė was initiator and head of Kaunas 2022 European Capital of Culture, a transformative project that just in 1 year alone, 2022, hosted over 1,500 events implemented by 77 Lithuanian organizations in collaboration with 500 European partner institutions. From 2010 to 2018, she served as the artistic director of the Kaunas Biennial, one of the leading contemporary art events in the Baltic region. In 2023, she was appointed General Commissioner of the Lithuanian season in France 2024 and curated a program of over 200 cultural and artistic projects across France. The topic she will speak on today is Beyond the Frame, Čiurlionis' Temporal Imagination and Visual Cycles.
Dear Brad, thank you. Thank you, colleagues from Yale University, for such a welcome, and dear conference guests. I will talk and proceed on the topic of my colleague from the first presentation about Čiurlionis' temporal imagination in visual arts. Mikalojus Konstantinas Čiurlionis stands as a singular figure in European modernness for the way he conceived painting, not as a static image, but as a temporal experience. A composer and painter in equal measure, he united sound and vision into one creative continuum. At the dawn of early modernism, the very notion of time was being redefined. It was no longer the absolute mechanical flow of Newton's universe, but a relative and elastic dimension in Einstein's physics. No longer a neutral background for art, but its living substance, as described by Henri Bergson-Duré, the inner rhythm of becoming. Čiurlionis' painting emerges at this precise intersection. His cycles unfold like symphonies, expressing not spatial stillness but duration, an intuition of time that is both physical and metaphysical. Today, I invite you to view Čiurlionis' work through three key shifts of modern perception of time. A paradigm shift of the scientific understanding of time. A transition in the aesthetic perception of time. And a transformation in the philosophical conception of time. Čiurlionis lived at the moment when the very concept of time was being redefined. In Western thought, two great paradigms coexisted and collided. Isaac Newton's notion of absolute time, an infinite linear from existing independently of matter, and Albert Einstein's emerging theory of relativity, which united space and time into a single dynamic continuum, transformed time into something situational, elastic, and inseparable from perception and motion. These shifts profoundly affected artists and thinkers at the turn of the century, who began to question whether time was a fixed frame or a lived experience. Čiurlionis' painting can be seen as a visual exploration of this same question. Čiurlionis thus challenged one of the most deeply rooted divisions in Western aesthetics, the separation between spatial and temporal arts. Since antiquity, painting was regarded as an art of space, while music, literature, and theater, deeply rooted in the ancient Greek culture, were conceived as a part of time experience through rhythm and sequence. At the turn of the 20th century, however, a new temporal art emerged, for example, cinema, expanding the very notion of how images could move and evolve in time. It was precisely at this historical moment that Čiurlionis shifted from music to painting, yet continued to compose. He thus worked simultaneously within both spatial and temporal arts. This coincidence was not accidental. Čiurlionis was deeply attuned to the newest artistic and scientific discoveries of his era, just as filmmakers were discovering time through moving images. He was discovering duration through painting, envisioning the canvas not as a static surface, but as a rhythmic and evolving structure capable of expressing the same temporal experience as music or film. Why I introduce here also cinema and film, because I wanted to start with his early cycle, Funeral Symphony, which already following the title, we see Čiurlionis' desire to translate musical form into painting, but not only musical form, but also combination of the structure, which closely relates also to cinematic approach of close-ups and distant views, as we could see in this cycle. The main theme of the series is a person's final journey. 6 paintings are linked by the image of coffin barriers and the funeral procession. Yet it's not only a story about death, it becomes a philosophical reflection of time suspended between life and death, day and night, the visible and unseen. Time is also experienced physically. As viewers follow the slow movement of the procession, they seem to walk together with it, sharing the rhythm of farewell. The changing light of the setting sun turns the passing of the day into an image of life itself fading away. The rhythm of composition strengthens the sense of time. The series is built almost like a film, alternating between close-ups and distant views, between pauses and movement, inviting us to travel through pictorial time. And the final painting feels like a still moment within this flow. The bowed figure, caught between presence and absence, expresses the dual nature of mourning. It could be the spirit returning home on the last time, or the living soul left in solitude, standing at the border between 2 worlds. Rex is one of the most important themes in Čiurlionis' creative work, and artists first began to explore the existence of the ruler of the world in his early works, as we can see from 1904 or 5. The Rex triptych is one of the earliest variations of this theme. Here again, Čiurlionis experiments with a new principle of presenting images, cinematographic close-ups and wide shots of the same scene captured in the same moment, but from different distances. In the final panel of the triptych, Čiurlionis gathers all elements into a single suspended frame. The ruler, the pedestal, the water, the eternal sky, the ship, and the worshipper coexist in one visionary tableau. Yet, Čiurlionis leads us to this revelation through a cinematic sequence of the shifting perspectives and close-ups, transforming painting into an art of duration and movement. Here you see the extract from the letter of Čiurlionis to his brother. He lists his paintings painted in about 1 year period when he was studying in Warsaw. So the bunch of cycles mostly. I put this because to see that only few paintings were single, but he would paint almost every his thought to express in more than one piece. What distinguishes Čiurlionis from many of his early 20th century contemporaries is his insistence on seriality. From his earliest student works onward, he consistently preferred to paint in cycles, in triptychs, diptychs, or expansive series of up to a dozen or more works. These cycles reveal a unique imagination of time or experience duration. They are not only visual compositions, but serve as invitation to durable experience intended to be read and felt sequentially, as in music or cinema, for example. In 1905, Čiurlionis embarked on his most ambitious project, the creation of the world. Conceived as a cycle of 100 paintings, of which only 13 were completed, this work reflects his vision of painting as a temporal, even infinite process. Again, quotation from Čiurlionis, the same letter. Let it be a cycle of 13 paintings. That's very good. The cycle is unfinished. I intend to paint it all my life, if only I continue to have ideas for it. It is the creation of the world, but not ours according to the Bible. Rather, some completely different, fantastical world. I would like to create a cycle of at least 100 paintings. Whether I will, I don't know. This reveals how deeply Čiurlionis was thinking in terms of duration, art as an unfolding process rather than fixed result. The openness of this cycle is essential. By leaving it incomplete, Čiurlionis affirmed that creation is never finished. It continues beyond the frame, beyond measurable time, in both art and life. In this sense, he anticipated the modernist fascination with works in progress, fragmentary narratives, and open forms. The French philosopher Henri Bergson offers a way to understand this idea. He distinguished between measurable physical time and real duration, what he called la durée, the inner living flow of experience. For Bergson, true time is not a line of separate moments, but a continuous movement of becoming, where past and present interpenetrate in constant creation. Čiurlionis' paintings gives this philosophy a frame. His cycles unfold not as static images, but as temporal experiences, inviting the viewer to enter the flow of transformation, to sense time as a living rhythm, much like listening to music. Just as Bergson contrasted intellect with intuition, Čiurlionis combined both, the compositional discipline of a musician and the visionary intuition of a mystic, especially in sonatas. In 1907, Čiurlionis turned even more directly to music form, creating what he called his visual sonatas. Here he explicitly borrowed the movements of a musical composition, allegro, andante, scherzo, finale, and transformed them into visual structures. Through rhythm, repetition, and variation, he translated musical temporality into pictorial time. Sonata of the Sun reveals his experiment most clearly. The sequence of 4 paintings follows the cycle of light, rising, radiating, fading, and extinguished. The allegro bursts with vertical motion and luminous contrast, while andante slows the rhythm into horizontal calm. Scherzo returns to movement and play, and finale closes the sequence with a frozen sun, an image of time suspended. Čiurlionis constructs visual rhythm as a musical store. Time is not depicted but experienced through movement and transformation. Sonata of the Spring translates the awakening of nature into visual tempo. Melting snow, rising plains, and diagonal currents evoke renewal and motion. The calm horizontals of andante create a contemplative pulse, while scherzo introduces vitality and surprise, giant fish breaking free from nets. The finale, where a mountain peak pierces the clouds, conveys transcendence and return of light. The sonata unfolds like the passage of time itself, from darkness to awakening. Sonata of the Serpent is among Čiurlionis' most enigmatic cycles. The serpent, a symbol of wisdom and transformation, becomes a metaphor for inner time and spiritual evolution. The sequence moves from the ruins of an ancient world through tension toward unity, where the serpent finally dissolves into radiant light. Here, durée, is experienced as metamorphosis, time as an unfolding of consciousness. Sonata of the Summer embodies fullness and harmony. Its bright palette and open compositions express a sense of plenitude, the peak of temporal and emotional energy. Andante slows the rhythm into the peaceful panorama of fields and sea, while finale lifts the scene heavenward, where kings rise through clouds, blessing the world below. Time here takes on a cyclical quality, birth, fullness, and transcendence forming one continuum. Sonata of the Sea translates the rhythms of the Baltic coast into music for eyes. Also, I want to show one of his quotations from his letter, that the sea is eternal quality in his thinking. Andante becomes introspective, revealing silent depths. Finale erupts a storm, transforming the sea into a cosmic force. Sonata of the Stars expands Čiurlionis' vision to the cosmic scale. The movement of mists, stars, and light follows a polyphonic rhythm, where forms overlap like musical voices in a fugue. The angel that traverses the Milky Way embodies both order and harmony, time dissolving into infinity. Duration becomes celestial, no longer measured by, but felt as eternal rhythm. The final sonata of the pyramids returns to earth, yet remains symbolic and spiritual. Egyptian motifs and luminous geometry create a dialogue between stability and transcendence. The fugue-like repetition of pyramids and praying figures suggest cyclical time, human devotion as an endless rhythm of ascent and return. Across all these cycles, Čiurlionis redefines a painting as a temporal art. His sonatas unfold like visual symphonies, where perception moves through phases of tension and rest, transformation and return. I would like to conclude with Čiurlionis' largest canvas, Rex, which stands as the culmination of his vision. Here, the cosmic king is no longer contained in a triptych, but commands as entire monumental composition. The painting synthesizes many of Čiurlionis' concerns: the layering of time, the fusion of myth and cosmos, the symbolic logic of form. Unlike the physical three-dimensional world, Čiurlionis' pictorial space is fluid and metaphysical. It merges cosmic vastness with inner vision and mythic and cosmic rhythms. In his paintings, we encounter the trace of lost civilizations, archetypical myths, and cosmic wanderings inspired by Camille Flammarion astronomy, all unfold through a temporal logic akin to musical development. Unlike the earlier Rex triptych, this single vast canvas of itself, cyclical, embedding within its structure multiple temporalities, microcosmic detail and macrocosmic grandeur. It is as if all Čiurlionis cycles converge here in one ultimate vision of unity and transcendence, which no longer measured by time. Time doesn't exist or doesn't matter in universe, or we can experience the time of this ruler of the king as once upon the time. To conclude my thoughts about being beyond the frame, Čiurlionis' art ultimately moves beyond the frame both literally and conceptually. He did not paint isolated scenes, but unfolding sequences and cosmogonies that function like visual symphonies. His training as a composer gave him profound sense of rhythm, progression, and return, enabling him to turn painting into time-based art. From Funeral Symphony to Creation of the World, from Sonata 1 to 7, and culminating in Rex, Čiurlionis created not images but temporal journeys. His work anticipates cinematic montage, modernist open form, and the 20th century interdisciplinary experiments with movement and perception. To look at Čiurlionis is therefore not merely to see, but to experience time, to pass from measurable physical time into intuitive duration, durée, of artistic and cosmic becoming. In this light, the unfinished nature of certain projects, such as the creation of the world or sonata of the spring, gains deeper meaning. Rather than incompletion, it expresses the Bergsonian idea of non finito. Art as an open process, mirroring life's continuous creation. In Čiurlionis, time itself becomes art's medium, not something to be depicted, but something to be lived, felt, and endlessly renewed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Virginia. And again, we will have time for questions afterwards. Our third speaker is Sandra Skurvida. Sandra is an art historian and independent curator practicing in cross-disciplinary, transnational, and ecosophical intersections of contemporary art. She is the author of a recent monograph on John Cage, Composing, Computing, and Curating, published just this year, and has contributed essays to Art Margins, Mind Mirror. She lives in New York City and in Bremen in Germany, and teaches at the Fashion Institute of SUNY State University of New York. Sandra, please, the time is yours.
Thank you so much, Bradley, for this introduction. Thank you to the previous speakers for so beautifully contextualizing Čiurlionis' work, both historically and in the unframed time. As I reflect on my personal, political, and intellectual journey from the last to the present century, from Vilnius to New York, it occurs to me that the foundations for my transdisciplinary thought were planted in my teenage mind through the reading, sometime before 1984, Vytautas Landsbergis' monograph Čiurlionio dailė, Čiurlionis' art, published in 1976, actually. If someone has a bookcase in Lithuania, you are likely to find Čiurlionis on it, as I did in my parents' library. The book is now lost, the library divided and misplaced, and sadly, few libraries in New York hold such books, but Yale University Library does, as Brad just gave me the book this morning. So thank you. This is an incredible gift. Intellectual.
Yes. Okay. I would love to be able to.
Absolutely not. I cannot pass through the door with this book, but I will. But this is a touchstone for me. So thank you for this, and also thank you for this symposium, which is perhaps the first academic event, apart from the musical events, dedicated to Čiurlionis in the US beyond the Lithuanian community spaces. I'm not sure if this is a correct statement, but I think I will hear about it later on. Thank you to Bradley Woodworth and Gražina Miknevičiūtė for conceiving and organizing this event, of which I'm very happy to be a part of. The discourse on Čiurlionis mirrors the changing Lithuanian identity, shifting from imperial multivalences to nationalism, affirmative in the pre-war years and resistant in the post-war, eventually becoming a symbol of independence, not least through association with Landsbergis. In the 21st century, this discourse has been regaining Čiurlionis' own worldliness. As Landsbergis writes, and I quote in my own translation from the aforementioned book, in all of Čiurlionis' work, there is no sign of narrow nationalism. In Vilnius at that time, national friction between Poles and Lithuanians was particularly acute. The Polish press, for example, slandered and ridiculed the first Lithuanian art exhibition and published caricatures of Čiurlionis' paintings. And he, as before, was close to his Warsaw friends, communicated cordially with his Polish choir members, with the painter Ferdynand Ruszczyk, who had settled in Vilnius, and with the Russian artist Ivan Trutnov, and the Jewish artist Leon Tokolsky. End of quote. National identity is closely tied to modernism, which is linked to both individuation, originality, and the standardization of form, as seen in art movements. Modernity and its instrument, the nation state, have demanded that an artist be identified nationally. Yet national identity has been put to the test in the post-colonial discourse, and probably we will have at some point a symposium on Soviet colonialism. As Okrien Bezer states, and I quote, decolonization portends to restore standard traditions to the so-called proper pasts, while national identity through the state works assiduously to reinvent and maintain them in the present and for the future. Decolonization, or the post-colonial, transforms the subject of cultural discourse, while the nation state reinvents the identity of the artist and transfigures the order of tradition for posterity. In the mode of the post-colonial is resistance and insubordination through transformation. That of a nation is consolidation and repetition through transfiguration. End of quote. I posit that the current resurgence of interest in Čiurlionis signifies such transfiguration. Transfiguration means a profound shift from the material to the spiritual. How does this shift manifest in our perceptions of Čiurlionis? Undercurrents of modern carrying content that hasn't been formalized and thus isn't locked into Western modernist canon resurfaced during the second decade of the 21st century. Hilma af Klint's surprise blockbuster exhibition at the Guggenheim in New York in 2019 has been followed by numerous exhibitions and publications that reclaim the spiritual and the mystical. Notable current examples on view right now include Fata Morgana, Memories of the Invisible, co-curated by Massimiliano Gione, Daniel Birnbaum, and Marta Pepini, and produced by Trussardi Foundation in Milan, and the 13th Seoul Media City Biennale Science, Technology of the Spirit, co-curated by Anton Bidokle, Haley Ayers, and our own Lucas Brzezinskis. These exhibitions, among many others, raised questions about the role of spirituality in the development of modern and contemporary art. The mystic, visionary, and arcane, often embedded in, this is, I want to emphasize this, in suppressed cultural traditions, hold a significant presence in today's artistic discourse as it seeks to address a broader crisis in the world. I will narrow this broader crisis to a crisis of modernity and how we respond to it today. As a result, I will refer to this vague term, spiritual practice, as an uncodified, transdisciplinary practice aimed at creating an experience that can be transmitted through encounters, including with artifacts such as art and music. The transdisciplinary nature of this practice is seen in applying a system from one discipline to another, such as musical structure to visual composition. As John Cage, who composed following a chance operations method borrowed from the Chinese oracle I King, said, a system once accepted accepts whatever. Among numerous paths alternative to the material modernism of the turn of the 20th century, theosophy offered a vision of transdisciplinary spirituality through a threefold way integrating the social, the political, and the cultural, seeking to mediate the modern splits between nature and culture, body and soul, the society and the individual. Italian sociologist Massimo Introvigne addressed Čiurlionis' contested connections to theosophy in his 2013 paper presented in Amsterdam, Enchanted Modernities, Theosophy and the Arts of the Modern. His argument follows the research of Lithuanian-Australian scholar Genovaitė Kazickas and Italian curator Gabriella Di Milia. In view of our symposium's title, Escaping with Čiurlionis, it's worth mentioning the 2010 exhibition at the Royal Palace of Milan, Čiurlionis, An Esoteric Journey, curated by Di Milia and Osvaldas Daugelis, who was the post-independence director of the Čiurlionis Museum from 1992 to 2019. In Soviet-occupied Lithuania, any mention of the esoteric was unacceptable unless framed as a Marxist critique, which might explain the prevalent adverse attitude of Čiurlionis' scholars in Lithuania regarding theosophical influences in his work, most of whom quote Sofija Čiurlionienės exchange with the early researcher on Čiurlionis, Estonian Alexis Ranit, denying such influences, yet the reasons for such a denial would have been evident at the time. A significant exception to this obfuscation can be found in the teaching and publications by Antanas Andrijauskas, including his study Reflections of the Ideas of the Theosophical Philosophy of Art in the paintings of Stabrauskas and Čiurlionis. The theosophical circles during Čiurlionis' studies in the Warsaw School of Fine Arts revolve around its director, Lithuanian-born artist Kazimieras Stabrauskas, also known by the Polish version of his name, Kazimierz Stabrowski. Stabrauskas was the founder of the Theosophical Lodge Alba in St. Petersburg, which he later moved to Warsaw. Čiurlionis and also he became a leader of the theosophical movement in Poland. During his studies in Warsaw, Čiurlionis and Stabrauskas, a student and teacher who shared a Lithuanian heritage, met regularly to discuss spiritualism, hypnotism, Hinduism, and ancient Egypt, among other things. This is evident in Čiurlionis' vision from 1905, exhibited the same year at the school, along with the 9 other paintings of the fantasies, a cycle, as we have seen, some of them good. Some of them good. So let's say this is a good one with a cross of Taos, also signifying a T for theosophy, and the Lithuanian Žaltys, the snake encircling snake encircling it. Čiurlionis and Stabrauskas, because of their shared Lithuanian origins, maintained either manifestly or latently a minority position in Warsaw as well as St. Petersburg. The attraction to spiritualism as an alternative to the Catholic and Orthodox religious dominions can also be seen as an expression of a suppressed cultural tradition. The minority position in the strategic location of culture, manifests in the inner resistance evident in the wide circle of minoritarian artists who became adept at theosophy and the occult. One prominent note in this minoritarian milieu in the shadow of empires was Bohemian artist František Kupka, who treated visual form as a time-based musical structure and was deeply influenced by mysticism and theosophy. Kupka knew of Čiurlionis. An Italian curator, Carlo Belloli, attests that Kupka has shared with him reproductions of Čiurlionis' work sometime in the 1950s. Čiurlionis and his Swedish contemporary, Hilma af Klint, share a minority position leaning into the unmodern via spiritual practice, communicated via language of visual art, as her visual expression was non-aligned with, yet adjacent to the art movements of her time. A critique aimed at her in the 1990s was that art was not an essential aim in her occult practice. Her being a woman and a medium certainly didn't help her to enter the temple of modernism, yet since the Guggenheim exhibition, this critical dismissal has shifted to adoration. This marks an atmospheric change, a sea change in contemporary art, which, like the spiritual realm, seeks to transcend disciplinary boundaries. As curator Helen Malsworth noted regarding of Klint, it seems like she's making pictures of how things are interrelated. She's trying to make a picture that draws on disparate fields of knowledge in a synthetic manner. She's producing a picture that is both image and diagram. Her pictures are like a set of instructions that then need other instructions. And that, to me, feels like a vulnerable place to be, because you are opting out of an Enlightenment model of discrete and bounded areas of expertise to say, actually, really, this is all interconnected. In essence, she's offering a Gaia-like theory of radical holistic interconnectivity, and we could go to Bruno Latour if we had more time. Her work, like that of Čiurlionis, proceeded in cycles mirroring the processual act of creation, such as her 193 works made from 1906 and to 1915. And we know now that Čiurlionis too planned to have 100 pieces in his creation of the world. So Hilma af Klint's paintings, the paintings for the temple, Visa 193. Like Čiurlionis, she was informed by a variety of esoteric teachings, including theosophy. Even though Rudolf Steiner initially dismissed her visual expressions at the first meeting in 1908, she eventually joined his Anthroposophical Society in 1920 and created works responsive to it. The intent of this presentation is to see the minority position from a broader perspective. If we zoom out from Čiurlionis to af Klint, we can zoom back in to a Lithuanian American interdisciplinary artist, Aleksandra Kashuba. In her 1977 lecture in New York, Čiurlionis' visual vocabulary, Kashuba discussed his transformative vision in terms of systemic restructuring of the worldview. I quote from her lecture and from his script. Čiurlionis used these symbolic images in the same way that discrete words or sounds are used. He arranged them in an order of their own, approximating visual or musical phrases. These unique arrangements of symbolic images into structures determined the interactions and brought to the fore his unique vision of the universe. End of quote. She's talking about Čiurlionis' vision as her own. Building from her experience of migration, Kashuba linked the earliest synesthetic expressions to the booming post-war art and technology industry. Like her fellow travelers in the mindscape, she sought to implement a synesthetic perception via her multifaceted practice, including installations, public art commissions, architectural models, collages, and an extensive body of writing, which she self-published in the early 2000s. Her concern was not with what the spirit is, that's a quote from her writings as well, not what the spirit is, but what the spirit does, with an echo to Wittgenstein. Kashuba relates, on one hand, to the spiritual tradition inherited from Čiurlionis and the earlier 20th century creators, and on the other hand, to contemporary thinking about the brain and its relation to the environment. Between the possibility of occupying territory and accepting the rules of deterritorialization, between the configuration of a network and its ephemeral, effaceable character. As she experimented with force formations, Kashuba simultaneously conceptualized her creative process in terms of the effects of the forces on materials and on human perception and behavior. Emphasis on the continuum on the human being and the environment helped circumvent the materialist divide between the inner and the outer, or between body and mind. Kashuba's work tentatively links to coeval scientific research on perception and memory formation. In this context, we can paraphrase Linda Nochling's great question, why have there been no great women artists, as why has there been no Čiurlionis in modern art? The answer remains the same. We can do our best to rediscover and reinstate forgotten artists to the canon, yet the absence draws attention to the mechanisms of exclusion, including the parameters of greatness. We have seen extensive scholarship seeking to restore Čiurlionis to art history by tying him to movements from symbolism to surrealism, with the timing and degree of abstraction serving as a litmus test of modernity. And this brings us to the question of abstraction, since the primacy of this allegedly modern invention was deeply contested by artists and scholars alike through the 20th century. This is also the question of originality, which contains individual primacy and subjectivity. However, if artistic expressions are reflections of spiritual practices, then everything one does is implicated in everything everyone is doing. Iconic traditions existed well before modernism, and it is evident that artists oriented towards the spiritual, including of Klimt, Kupka, Kandinsky, and Čiurlionis, pursued this uniconism and the modern tradition subsumed into a secular abstraction. Needless to mention two figureheads of modern abstraction, Piet Mondrian and Kazimir Malevich, were adjacent to this tradition. This expanding minority network brings us to the unmodern origins of modern abstraction, of which Čiurlionis is a part. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have maybe 20 minutes or 25 minutes for questions. First off, thank you very much to these wonderful presentations. And so please, if you would very briefly introduce yourself and then ask your question concisely, will help us get to as many as possible. So please.
This is perhaps less of a question, more of a comment. But my name is Lithuanian. I'm a musician, I'm a trumpeter. And actually, the comment for Virginia. A mentor of mine, trumpeter Steve Burns in Chicago, was always impressing on me and others the explicitly temporal nature of music and how music is different from other art disciplines in that fact that it is temporal, it is time-based. So it's interesting to see how now, perhaps through a different lens, Čiurlionis was also maybe explicitly time-based in his artwork. But I bring up my mentor also because he has a definition that he uses for music that I really like. He says music is sound-based time art, which I really like, and I really try to embody that when I make music. And now it makes me think Čiurlionis in his artwork could maybe potentially be called something like color-based time art. But yeah, so not really a question, more of a comment, but Ačiū labai.
Nice.
Rick, you want to go ahead and address that? Or Philip, or any of you that would like?
Thank you for nice comparison.
I would just add to that, having heard Virginia's paper and really appreciated it, as well as Sandra's. It's clear that Lessing and everyone were all wrong in a way. I don't think we actually do look at a painting like that and then walk on. Maybe in a blockbuster gallery where you have to get through 400 plinths in an hour with your timed ticket. And we all know that people by and large spend seconds in front of a painting and go, oh, I know that one, I like that one, and then spend more time reading the didactic text and taking a selfie. But in fact, that's a major crime against the work of art, which has always been conceived as, in some ways, temporal. And I'm thinking actually about the question of religious art, where it's storytelling and there is layers of sequentiality and temporality. A story of the journey into Egypt will have all of the stages of that narrative laid out in one moment. So I think, Lessing is talking about the one statue, which you maybe do go around and move on. But I think it is a betrayal of something. And what's interesting about these papers is the way they reflect on the inadequacy of a theory, which we've often taken to be normative. But Čiurlionis' work reveals to have been very flawed as a way of that's a different response to your way of, but I love the fact that I think we're all going to be using that one.
Yes.
Please.
I'm Dr. Talia Giedrina, which is recently honorary consul of Lithuania here in the state of Connecticut. And we are very, very pleased that Čiurlionis topic became to be so important here. And I work with Bradley Woodworth, and we talked about this for many, many months. And I'm so happy to see presenters as well as to see fantastic presentations. During summer, I visited Lithuania, and I did talk to many about Čiurlionis' significance in the art and music. And actually, we were able at the Opera House, the Opera Theater, to listen to Čiurlionis' musical school presenters or students. And I understood how important it is to present this information to young students, to a young kind of population, that they can see things differently. What I wanted to say and to ask you, how this integration can be presented to young students. I see not only painting and art, especially going to Kaunas Čiurlionis Museum, I see philosophy. I see life here integrate. There were so many things that we could probably combine or integrate. And I was just thinking how we can use your presentations here in Connecticut at our universities to show to students.
Yes, very, very good question. And at the Čiurlionis National Museum of Art, we have very splendid educational program, especially for this anniversary year. For example, our educators prepared lectures for school children on 10 or 15 topics related to mathematics, physics, astronomy, literature, of course, philosophy, ethics. And the same school would come 10 times to museum for 2 hours each time, and they go through this in deep educational process. Created for this year anniversary, but for sure we could maybe share some, methodological tools. If you approach me, I will give you a card as well. But yes, Čiurlionis could be seen from so many perspectives, especially that from musical as well, and literature side we haven't spoken yet, but he was also writing some literature.
Okay, thank you so much.
Do either of you want to add anything?
Well, thank you again for bringing teaching into this perspective, because of course everything starts with from a young people's mind. So as reading books, seeing work, and including these visuals into whatever story you want to tell, I think would let people to pick it up and find their own way. I think that maybe even stories don't need to be attached, but the context given and the entry point through Čiurlionis' sounds and images, I think they are so enveloping that every child, every student would find drawn into this world.
Thank you.
Well, I would add a question. So first off, let me preface this by saying that I'm not a musicologist or an art critic. I'm a complete neophyte, although I have been looking at Čiurlionis' images and listening to his music for over 20 years. So with that said, how much do we know about Čiurlionis' own awareness of these very deep discussions? I mean, of course, well, I don't know if that's even a relevant question, but the depth and the breadth and the geographical extent of these discussions, Philip, that you mentioned, raise that question, at least for me.
I'm going to offer a brief answer that's not an answer, but that you set up the question I was really wanting to point to Sandra. In Virginija, having been at the Lithuanian conference 2 weeks ago, about where do we put an artist like this? Because there seems to be one narrative which is pretty at the center of these pan-European debates, Bergson, cinema, Einstein, and he was widely read and he was aware of all of these things. And then there's the other one, which I think, Sandra, you had this question of post-coloniality, and this is someone who is an organic artist who just spontaneously had these feelings by I'm not saying which is right, but there seem to be two critical traditions slightly arguing with each other as to where to situate him. Because I think of that question you said, if we want to canonize an artist who hasn't been at the center of the canon, do we need to put him in conversation with Kandinsky in Munich? Do we need to put him in dialogue with major figures? And I think it's a huge question about how we write modern histories of music or modern histories of literature, which often then revolve around big nations who are doing all the canonizing, Paris and Vienna and Berlin. So it's badly expressed, but I don't know how much he knew because I don't read Polish and Lithuanian and hence wouldn't want to speculate. But I think taking a step back, there is always this question about what to do with figures. And I'm trying not to use the word small nation or margins or periphery, coming from a frankly very small marginal nation, which has ridiculously overinflated ideas of its own importance and world significance. That's, I was trying to avoid putting it in those terms, but that's what I'm thinking of. And I thought we heard in the papers a real dialogue between these two traditions of centering him and at the same time wanting to decenter our very normative histories of modern. So it was a non-question, a non-answer to a really, really important question in these topics anyway.
It's very difficult to measure where Čiurlionis actually, he was not quotating, those philosophers we apply to his work now while trying to open our minds to Čiurlionis' realms of his art. but actually he was very much absorbing everything what was around him. And how I told about cinematic approach, we have only one glimpse from his sketchbook that he drew, most probably from Warsaw, in 1904 or 5, the screen with cinematic camera. So we know only from his sketchbook that he was acquainted with cinematic, that he would visit cinema at Warsaw cinemas. So that's how we could, somehow interpret the cinematic approach, but he himself never spoke about that clearly.
So any additional, we're just trying to find out if there are people on Zoom asking questions. Please, additional questions? Yes.
Another reflection about this, and it's really a question which came up 2 weeks ago. So musicologists, when they look at Čiurlionis' scores, particularly Mikalojus, are interested in his radical deformation of conventional musical language, sonata form structure. And he was learning that in Warsaw. He was learning that by listening to German music, the tone poems. And yet, when we look at the sonata form structures that he puts up, these are 18th century structures, allegro, andante, scherzo, finale. And there's something really interesting about the décalage, the kind of temporal slippage between the deformation of everything he had learned in Leipzig and in Warsaw musically. Themes appear at the end which have never been heard before, and you're not allowed to do that in classic Formenlehre teaching. His grouping of subjects is manipulate, which makes him a hyper-modern composer in the deformation of musical form around 1900. And yet, when we look at this, we have preludes and fugues, and we have a highly canonical. So I suppose I'm interested in the question of how can we interrogate that seeming contradiction, or what could musicologists bring to that art historical discussion of his use of musical forms? There might be a really interesting answer to which I don't yet know, but that's just a question which did crop up.
Yeah.
But which goes to the heart of disciplinarity. How possible is it for someone trained in musicology to really get to the bottom of art historical? And we talk about interdisciplinarity and a lot, but it takes a lot of time and effort to read your way into those fields and to be able to even pose the question before you answer it. So that's yeah. I've been thinking about this for 2 weeks now and don't have any answers, and I'm getting better answers.
So if I may to throw something very, very still unfounded, something maybe a bit too fresh, but since we have the room full of experts, I think we might hear from them. So how about comparing Čiurlionis's both studies and structures in these deformed late works to Erik Satie, who too studied at the Schola Cantorum. He studied choral music, the same as Čiurlionis in Warsaw. And the relation to French context was very, very close. So this is a proposition, not a statement. But as I was comparing the scores and the sounds, and both Satie and Čiurlionis working in an intersection of music and art, somewhat adjacent to both symbolism and then later on surrealism, which Čiurlionis did not reach, but symbolism was right there in Satie's early work before his association with Dada surrealists. So comparing the scores, the distortion and the time-based element is there in both composers. But I will not put my name on this as yet.
So I'd like to add a question here, and it's about his intentionality and direction in this question of interdisciplinary, intersectionality of what we hear and what we see. And that, as I understand, he was working on an opera, which one would think would be an ideal place to explore some things, Jurate. He didn't finish it. You all know much more about this. That's about all I really know, except for I just, one of you were speaking, found out that somewhere in Lithuania, the composers and artists then try to imagine what this was going to be and that it has been actually performed. So why didn't he, was it last week? Oh,
Yeah, I saw
we
it.
should have been there. Why didn't he finish this opera? It seems ideal chance to explore some of these, the issues that you have all been talking about.
Why he couldn't finish?
Well, I mean, what you like, anything, if that is if this opera, the idea of it is pertinent in any way to the issues you've been talking about, interesting to know.
Yeah, it's very pity that the opera was not finished because from the correspondence between Čiurlionis and Sophia, his wife, it was clear that it's one of the also goals of their common creativity. And Sophia wrote a libretto for the opera already, and Čiurlionis was working while he was also in Petersburg. But after his health went very bad direction, he couldn't finish many started projects. And even more said that Sophia, after Konstantinas' death, she burned out or just, yeah, the libretto was just destroyed. And what about the performance last weekend in Vilnius, that composers they feeded this artificial intelligence with Čiurlionis' scores, the latest ones, and also of his contemporaries, and gave and worked for not so easily, worked for several months to make imaginable opera Jurate, and it worked very well. I liked it, and but it's not a contemporized version of possible Čiurlionis opera, but it's if you would listen to Čiurlionis actually. So some of my colleagues were a little bit disappointed of uncontemporarity of this opera, unmodern or postmodern or whatsoever, because it sounds like if artificial intelligence is working, you would get something very utopical or something. But the task which was given by composers, free composers would work with intelligence, was to be as close to Čiurlionis' ideas as possible in this composition. And also, I would not expand on visual scenographic approach. It was amazing, but music itself, it was like if you would listen Čiurlionis in 1908, 1913 or so.
Well, I have some more questions, but this is the time for any of you to be able to ask questions of our guests. Well, then I'll go on with another question that I have. And this has to do with this. I suppose it's rooted in the after effects of the movement from the imperial to the national, because with Lithuania achieving independence and then at least having, even after losing it in 1940, being able to have an environment in which things Lithuanian were emphasized. In many ways, this temporality does continue, and even to the state beyond just musical specialists. So this is not eternal. He is eternal now, as long as there is a Lithuanian nation that imagines itself in these specific cultural and linguistic terms. I just wanted to show here a book that I picked up, I think this past summer. It's an Abecedele, so a ABC book based on Čiurlionis's art. So my question is, does this do justice or no, does this provide an opportunity for these issues of temporality to be realized? Or in some way is his rising to the pantheon in a national state something separate and actually something not related to what his own goals were through this interest and through this synesthesis of art, music and image. Is what we're doing now, is what he is now, what he would, is it doing justice to his art? Is this what, does it help us explain, understand it even better?
Everyone is looking at me. Thank you for your question, Brad. It's a very good question, but I don't have an answer. I think that every artist is changing with the time, and every time has new answers to every art. And it seems that Čiurlionis was of the time when Lithuanian nation emerged as a nation state. He was an artist for the time of Soviet occupation. He was a sign of resistance. You can simply have a book of Čiurlionis and that tells all. And he became a sign of liberation. And now he's a sign of global integration. That's why we are here. So it seems that his work is so inclusive that it travels through such transformations and really radical changes from the 20th to 21st century. I think today is especially fertile time for Čiurlionis as we are moving into discussions of minority position in the global discourse, but also decentering of that discourse and moving towards thinking about spirituality, environment, and integration of disciplines in some new meta-discipline.
And I would like to add a few words. Then from many perspectives of Čiurlionis' work, when we have guests, we can also explain Lithuanian history through Čiurlionis' case. So it's so important that this history is not framed into the, let's say, pure Lithuanian narrative, nationalistic, but it opens all Lithuanian levels of our society. For example, as Čiurlionis was speaking in his family Polish language, while Lithuania at that time was under Russian Empire, and during his birth time and almost full creation until 1904, Lithuanian language was forbidden to be taught at schools, and Latin scripts were forbidden to write. Only Kirillitsa was allowed. So many things, and Čiurlionis, which father was Lithuanian and mother was German, and family which was but otherwise the mother could also speak Lithuanian fluently, and father as well, but anyway they spoke Polish, and so many things around this one family. And then Čiurlionis put effort to learn Lithuanian fluently. Of course, he knew songs, Lithuanian songs, and since early compositions, musical compositions, he used Lithuanian ethnic songs for the harmony and etc. But he put the real effort to study Lithuanian in deep, and was the one of first to join Lithuanian movement, still under Russian Empire, and even studying in Warsaw, he joined Lithuanian club of intellectuals to resist the Russian Empire, structures. His close friend was arrested even for that activities. That's why he developed the secret language among his siblings in the family to express some resilient language in a more safe way. So we could talk only about historical layers for one this Čiurlionis topic, and I'm glad that it is not closed narrative that Čiurlionis would open very multi-ethnic, multi-layered Lithuania through his character and personality.
Excellent, thank you.
I just have one more question.
So one more brief question so that we will still have time for a
It's so
break.
important that you touch that historical aspect, because when we are advertising events about Čiurlionis or about Baltics, it's so important for people to understand, a history of Europe as well as Baltic states, that these states did not exist for some periods. But at the same time, when we invite people to visit Vilnius or Riga or Tallinn, it's so important to tell them, what history used to be. And when we invite people to visit museums, my understanding is that Čiurlionis is so powerful when you are listening to his music and you follow all these paintings. Tell me, what do you think? Should we invite students to go and just to listen that integration music and art or painting?
Yeah, could be both ways, but in our museum, in the exhibition hall, we usually do not put in the exhibition hall, do not put music. It's separate music hall at the museum to listen to his music. But some curators at some point, they suggest that, for example, next spring, we are presenting Čiurlionis exhibition in Tokyo, and curator decided to also have one corner of the exhibition with musical sound system with Čiurlionis music. So I like both ways.
Thank you very. If we can do it in just really, no? You could come.
I just wanted to say that I actually have a group I wrote to, and I have done this big immersive concert. I'm a musician at Yale, and I had his words and the paintings are choreographed. Basically, they're shown while we play music and have his writings also, because I feel it is an immersive experience to feel all of that. That's the way this is mine. So I'm excited about doing that more, but it's difficult. It's a difficult process, but thank you for all your talks. It was really great to hear.
Thank you. So please join me in thanking our speakers. Okay, all right, so we have about 50 minutes, 45 minutes to break. We'll come back and begin our second panel at 12:45. Thank you.